Okay, Jordan Peterson's got a new video. It's July 22nd, and he's doing his evil mad scientist thing, the Bond villain routine, whatever you want to call it. And here he's obviously hunkered himself up in some kind of remote layer. Now, this is the kind of thing I don't normally have the time for to go over these videos, but unfortunately, I have a stomach ache today, so I had to stay home from work. And I'm going stir crazy, and this came on. It was just too much. Before we go through the video, I'll just say that I used to be a fan of Jordan Peterson back when I found out about him on Hacker News, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. Then he was just like an interesting psychology professor with some interesting theories about Carl Jung and stuff like that. And obviously he's gone off in a direction. All right, let's see what he has to say now.
We are in the midst of a culture war.
Okay, yeah, that's what a lot of people think. It's kind of self-aggrandizing to say like, oh, we're in a war, you know, especially when that justifies all kinds of actions. I would ask him to think about like, you know, what are the terms of this war? Is this an anything goes war, or is he just being a drama queen? And really, the country's just going through something akin to the civil rights movement.
Although it started in the universities, particularly in France.
Oh, those French universities. I don't know what he's talking about. You know, because normally he just complains about the United States. I wonder if he's talking about the May events of 1969, you know, like a couple generations ago. Of course, he doesn't explain that. Of course, we know that France is just a convenient sign or a symbol for something fancy and contemptible and overindulgent. So if you know, like in Phil Robertson's book, he talks about fancy European coffee shops. Oh no, you know that place where like most of us came from, like Europe. Yeah, we hate that now. So that includes France.
Through the open portal of the damnable Yale.
I had to laugh there. For a couple of reasons. First of all, one of my buddies that I often discuss JP with is from Yale. And I'll have to remind him that he's damnable. The other layer is, you know, throughout this video, he's alternately going back and forth between despising capitalist structure and also trying to reform it. It's, you know, I think he's trying to figure out what he's saying. And when he talks about Yale, you know, there's no one thing that you can say about it. I mean, it's got, yeah, a lot of U.S. presidents came from Yale, a lot of lawyers, a lot of CEOs. But, you know, as you know his shtick, he's going to start ranting about social equality practices. I don't see how that started at Yale or anywhere. I mean, maybe it did, but the other thing that's funny is his use of the term damnable. Not only is that like sort of like retro boomer speak, you know, it's just kind of cute on its own. But throughout this whole talk, he just harps on hell and Satan and being damned. You know, it's not even like a full application of Christianity to his thoughts. You know, it's not any other moral lessons, which, you know, he does do in some of his other videos, like, oh, you should learn the story of Job. He in this case, the only religious reference is hell and fire and smoke and stuff. So much so that I am almost ready to accuse him of appropriating Southern Black Baptist ministers. Let's go on.
And then into the rest of the institutes of higher education. It is not only the faculty and administrators of our colleges and universities who are at fault. Those charged with the privilege and responsibility of running the corporate world are lining up to kowtow at the DIE altar. Diversity, inclusivity, and equity at a rate.
I love the way he says diversity, inclusivity, and equity, like as if we're talking about like castor oil, sulfur, and other stuff that tastes bad. I think obviously he's trying to transmit to people how they're supposed to feel. And that's certainly the whole entire point of this talk, is telling you how to feel, despite his anti-authoritarian stance, which is very, very ironic. And I really think he hasn't figured it out yet.
That exceeds, and with a cowardice comparable to that characterizing the most contemptible of pencil-necked academics.
Okay, yeah, cowardice and contemptible and pencil-necked academics. That's another thing about this talk, is he's picking on pencil-necked academics, and the whole time he's using these 5-syllable words, like, and I just like that, because I like 5-syllable words, and I guess pencil-necked geeks are just my people. I don't know, but obviously you're supposed to despise them. Message to CEOs.
CEOs in particular, evil capitalists, all would reject this nonsense, this idiot postmodernism with its denial of any objective world, divine or material, this appalling and murderous Marxist wolfery in sheep's clothing.
So he doesn't do nuance, and so when he talks about CEOs constantly in this video, he just seems to not really make any difference between small CEOs, like of a company with like 20 employees, or one with 100 employees, or even 100,000 employees. He sort of uses the term, he treats them all the same. So that makes it kind of hard to understand, what he's really getting at. I mean, obviously he's trying to tell you how to think, but anyway.
Turns out that the left's ability to weaponize guilt and the contempt that far too many in the business world have for ideas.
Okay, so this is what he keeps talking about here is guilt. I guess you could say that it's part of maybe some of the other religious ideas that he's bringing into this. I think a lot of us are compassionate people, and that's why we help other people. I mean, take the story of the Good Samaritan, right? You help the person in the ditch because you're compassionate. And what he presents here is this model in which everybody is absolutely guilty. And I think he's kind of relying on some of his cachet as a psychologist to say that guilt absolutely arises from success. And he's trying to tell people that when they're successful, they're going to feel guilty, so they better do something about it. And he's basically ignorant of the idea that anyone would do anything for reasons of compassion.
Have proved an unstoppable combination. Perhaps I should have seen this coming. Part of what doomed the benighted universities was a thoughtless corporatism.
So, okay, this is pretty interesting too, because he's talking about these universities that are doomed. I don't see any universities that are doomed. Do you? I think universities are doing extremely well. Tuitions are extremely high. So I think when he's talking about doomed, he means it like in his own worldview. And I think he's referring specifically to these cultures of compassion and what he calls DIE and ESG, which we'll talk about more later.
Introduction of managerial speak among the administrators.
But what's really fun here is he's starting to become a commie, okay? He's complaining that universities are too capitalist. And this is a constant theme in this thing, is how capitalism is bad. Here he is talking to these CEOs, and then like everything he's saying supports this idea that what capitalism does is wrong. Give a listen.
Too many of whom were failed and therefore demoralized lecturers and researchers, turning in desperation to ape the business world.
So I wonder if he's speaking from some kind of personal experience here. By not talking about that, we can only speculate. When he says many of these administrators were failed lecturers, I mean, Maybe. I don't know. I'd actually like to hear some more about that. How does that system work? Um, they say that those who can't do teach, but I think that's kind of mean and wrong. But anyway, it would probably help his case if he explored that idea a little bit.
All academics worth their salt, so to speak, at least have the spine to have some contempt for their competitors on the public status front, deserved as it is in some ways, or not. And I knew, too, from extensive experience talking to corporate types, that the human resources departments were impossibly resentful and corrupt and ill-informed and desperate for power at any cost.
Okay, I think he's gonna blow a blood vessel here. Talking to corporate types, what does he actually mean here? Is this like people who want to be in corporations, people who are in corporations, people who work for corporations? But anyway, that would just help the case if he kind of grounded some of this in actual experience that people can relate to. Or he says the HR departments are out of control and they want power at any cost. It's obviously hyperbolic. Power at any cost. I mean, I don't see them poisoning people. And I don't know how much power that they really have. But, as we see, he's going to start talking about their influence on hiring, which is interesting because, definitely HR departments have more influence on hiring now that we're keeping track of people and paying attention a little bit more to their ethnicities, etc.
And even worse than the dreadful HR/DIE combination, perhaps, if that is even possible, is the new corporate and government craze for environment, social, and governance dicta.
Okay, so here's another term you're supposed to hate. Environment, what is it? Society, what can I say? I think it would probably really help his argument if instead of just like repeating things with a disgusted tone, if he explained what some of that is. And I think if you look at some corporate prospectuses every now and then, like if you're a stock investor, then you'll see that there's some kind of movement. I'm not all too familiar with it. I only read a few odd prospectuses here and there. But, the companies are definitely looking to see if big corporations have a mix of ethnicities and genders and things in there. And, he's going to make the case, or he's going to try to tell you that corporations should not be doing this because it's going to take away from their bottom line. And he goes on in this video to talk about how CEOs should be greedy. And I think it's kind of funny how in his own ideology of, he's only seeing things from his perspective. He's not really realizing the possible cynicism that companies are doing this because they want more money. Okay, consumers right now are very conscious of the environment and various equality issues. So consumers are putting their money where their mouth is, and that's part of the reason why this is. Some of these companies are changing this way. I think he's claiming it's all just because of guilt by the CEOs. Whereas I'm saying it could also be compassion, and then it could also just be even more cynical than he's even talking about. But that's my problem with this guy, is he's not really teaching you how to think or teaching you about ideas, or setting you up or empowering you to make you things, how to figure out things on your own. He's giving a perspective that supports his preconceived notions. So, if you go by his thing of just everything's all about guilt, then you might not even realize the very real probability that people are doing it for compassion or because they're just trying to appeal to those consumers.
So-called ESGs, as every idiot fad needs an oh-so-in-the-know acronym.
Oh my God, you're going to pop a blood vessel, Jordan.
As one set of corporate consulting half-wits and moral posturers put it, quote, investors are increasingly applying these non-financial factors as part of their analysis process to identify material risks and growth opportunities. ESG metrics are not commonly part of mandatory financial reporting, though companies are increasingly making disclosures in their annual report or in a standalone sustainability report. Non-financial factors applied to identify material risks.
I love how that just makes him so angry. And you see right there, he talks about how these investors are applying these, but he doesn't go into why. He's just going to say it's got to do with his guilt. And the other thing to notice here is, if you know anything about his history, how he got into being an outspoken conservative, on the world stage. It had to do with whether or not he was required to use requested pronouns on his college campus. So what he's actually kind of doing here is triggering himself by perseverating on the word mandatory. So that's what I think is going through his mind.
Standalone sustainability reports? All this smacks of central planning.
Oh, yeah, this is the other thing I love about this talk. He's so terrified of communism, central authoritarian communism, and I went, because of him, I actually went and read, what was that book about the gulags? And yeah, it's definitely scary. It's nothing but just people in jail and how the government put everybody in jail. And it's terrifying, it's Soviet history, and so he's really sort of projecting this concept of centralization on, well, it's not clear who, but I think it's implied that it's the United States. So I think he's saying that we're switching over to some master plan. See, he switched gears. He does this a lot. He kind of switches tracks. So, we were talking about CEOs and stuff, but now we're talking about central planning, as if there is some centralized body somewhere who's making these decisions like hierarchically, and don't forget, he is the guy who loves hierarchy and says it's very natural, but, this is probably why he's so afraid of centralization, because that would put somebody in control of the whole entire hierarchy. But it's interesting just to think about how centralized we are and are not. At least, in the United States, which is probably the only thing I can really speak much on. There are different degrees of centralization. It's I'm going to use probably the term that he probably just doesn't know, but comes from one of his least favorite philosophers, Deleuze and Guattari. There's this idea of a Riemannian surface, which is kind of like a crumpled up sheet of notebook paper. So, you could think of things in sort of a binary, like it's centralized or not, and we know that that's way too simplified. You could think of things as a gradient, like here it's very centralized and over here it's not, and maybe that's a little more useful. But in reality, what you have is just millions and millions of autonomous entities, all the people and all the organizations we form and all the relationships that we form, all having different amounts of centralization. I mean, look at the Red Cross, right? Presumably they have some central office that manages everything about the Red Cross. I mean, is that automatically bad because it has a top, or I think maybe he's more worried about centralization. I think it's just kind of communist phobic, which is great because he just goes on in this video to talk about how he's becoming more interested in communism and against capitalism. Let's listen.
Not to mention a low, shallow, self-justifying moralizing, which can and does in no wise stand in for genuine ethical action. Those planet-saving sustainability goals.
Oh, I love this. Planet-saving sustainability goals. Okay, I want to talk about planet-saving. So, first of all, we trust scientists for so many things. We know scientists get us to the moon, they put satellites in space, they build networks, they do amazing medicine, etc., etc. And when it comes to things that people are uncomfortable with, like environmentalism, suddenly we're like, oh, scientists don't know what they're talking about. So, and I know that there are definitely a subset of people that will just kind of boldly proclaim science like it's a meme, and they annoy the crap out of me. I don't really like that either. But I'm not going to make a snide video from a mountaintop hideout about it. Yeah, the other thing I want to talk about is, even if you do have a bias against environmental scientists, I want you to consider just measurements, okay? If you look at just measurements over history of temperature, you're going to see that they're increasing and increasing. And that's, you don't have to make any theories or go out any limbs to see that it's getting hotter. Like, that's just factual. Like, people have had thermometers for like 150 years and they just plot everything. So, that's definitely of concern. And then the other thing is, people are still debating about whether or not it's man-made or not. And my response, I happen to believe that we do contribute it in some amount. I can't tell you exactly how much, but even if it were not man-made, don't you think that the rising temperatures would be something that you would want to mobilize against? I mean, even if it wasn't man-made, even if all the scientists were wrong, the fact that it's getting hotter and hotter seems like something worth going into battle against. But, if you want to save the planet, then, oh, you're a ghoul. Oh, spooky.
Can simply and finally not be instituted from the top down, particularly not when they will be both formulated and enforced by people who are very interested in looking good, but very short on experience, ability, and wisdom.
So I think this is a common theme that he also broaches a lot. It's kind of the idea of superficial action versus actually acting. And there's a lot that you could say about this. Certainly there's a concept of greenwashing. In a way, people are so desperate to make the planet safe and livable that they're falling prey to a lot of large corporate influence. I mean, there's tons of evidence for it. Vice just published an interesting video with a whole bunch of greenwashers. It's not hard to find, and it's been going on for decades. So I think that he's, definitely got a point about getting to the bottom of and trying to dissect and see who's actually working on things and who's not. Of course, he's not telling you that. He's just telling you everybody who wants to save the planet is wrong. But I'm telling you, go and look this up for yourself. Don't just take this guy's word for it.
CEOs, how can you not see? Oh yes, there's that contempt for ideas again. There's that guilty pandering to the utopian leftist mob.
All right, yeah. So this is another idea that he brings up. Like I already talked about the guilt and how he's trying to say that CEOs are doing everything out of guilt.
The DIE mandates and ESG disclosures and the massive administrative bureaucracy that thrives on such pseudo work is precisely equivalent to the worst sort of fifth column.
I have to admit, I don't know what fifth column is here, but I want to just kind of call out what might be considered a dog whistle. So, JP is definitely appealing to populist people. And so when he uses the word pseudo work, he's definitely trying to draw up images of people who are working with their hands. And this is definitely one critique that I have of the center and of the left that, just not a lot of people really appreciate. And it's not my original idea. I got it from Noam Chomsky himself, who was critiquing the left when he said it. He said that a lot of the United States, particularly the agricultural regions, were passed over in the last 2 decades of technological development. I mean, think about it. The .com era didn't benefit people who had farms as much, or even, small businesses like plumbing as much as it did, people in media, whether that's social media or anything else involved in the internet. So I think that's really sort of an interesting thing to keep in mind. And of course, I think if Jordan Peterson really wanted to prove his point, he would listen to a little Noam Chomsky and say, "Oh yeah, that's yeah, there's something to that." But that's not what he's doing. He's not really trying to get people to think or help them out or anything. He's trying to just get some validation for his own experiences.
You CEOs are elevating the least competent people in your corporations. That's you, human resources personnel.
I mean, I wonder if this guy got pulled into HR and and yelled at or something, because he's really got a bone to pick with HR. And yeah, you CEOs, the least competent people. I mean, he just uses so much hyperbole. It's hard to actually talk about this, because it's difficult to say where he's using it for effect and where he really legitimately doesn't know what he's talking about.
To the highest positions of decision-making and company planning.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, because every company I've worked at, has an HR person deciding how many widgets we're going to build and who our customers, our marketing department. I think he's hypersensitive here. I think that these ideas of compassion, diversity, they do influence many regions. Like when you're advertising, you're probably going to think, gee, should I just advertise to all the white people? Or is it possible some other colors of people in my country might buy my product too? Maybe I should put some of them in the ads. But when he's saying that they're elevated to the highest positions of power, in HR, not only is he looking over all the other parts of the business, but they're not in charge of everything any more than any individual at a C level is. The CEO, the CTO doesn't control everything. The chief medical officer doesn't control everything. It's actually a whole bunch of shared power between the C level and the board. For someone who critiques corporate types and big corporations and CEOs so much, compared to me, who's just a career engineer, I don't think he has a lot of experience inside corporations.
Turning over your hiring decisions to those deluded enough to think that diversity is a substitute for ability, and to believe that equity merely means equality of opportunity.
Yeah, I just love how he just has to spit when he hears the word equity. And now he's going to give you his definition of equity. Notice how he's not giving any of the listeners their own space to figure out what equity means, or empowering them or encouraging them or suggesting them that they go out and try to understand what different people mean by equity. All he's going to do is just give you his definition, and he doesn't want you to look any further.
What does it mean? How about you take the time to find out? A hint. It means...
See, he's like, oh yeah, why don't you go find out? Actually, let me just tell you right now.
Equality of outcome. A principle utterly and absolutely antithetical to every free market principle ever established, and a doctrine as opposed to the operations of the capitalist world as anything conceivable produced by...
So, yeah, he's trying to say that, you're not going to make money if you go around hiring black folks, right? He said it's antithetical to capitalism. But, just like I've already, introduced, there could be extremely cynical reasons why companies are doing this. Mainly, they actually want people of color to buy their products and make money that way, So even if they were to operate very cynically and just say, I don't care about this stuff at all, but I'm just going to put a whole bunch of racially diverse people on the cover of our products so they buy it, that's being a good capitalist. Or maybe they're just compassionate and just realized, oh yeah, yeah, that's right, we have been doing things the wrong way. And there's another factor too, which is minorities are attaining positions of power slowly and steadily, and a lot of them are actually running these businesses. And so, do you think that they would have compassion for their customers as well? So I guess you can, try to listen to Jordan Peterson and say, oh my God, I can't hire Indians, or I can't hire Puerto Ricans, or what have you, because I'm not going to make money. But I think that's like a risk you would take, because it doesn't necessarily jibe with what consumers are saying. Like, consumers are saying they would rather spend money on businesses with diversity initiatives, people, companies that are putting money back into the environment. Now, is that 100% intuitive and logical? He's going to go down the path of saying that companies shouldn't be political. I got to admit, it's like a little bit of a non sequitur. Like when I go to buy like macaroni, and the company says we're giving money back to the environment, it can appear like why are they doing that? And I think it's got to do with how companies use resources, right? If you're going to be a big company with a lot of employees, you're going to use a lot of resources. You're going to have the roads. You're going to use lots of electricity. It's going to be necessary to build infrastructure, and that's why you pay taxes. But then there are also a lot of other resources that you use, and there's environmental costs. Whether you're the energy that you're using is polluting the environment, or your factory's giving off steam. And I think that's why these companies are giving back to the environment. Now, I think if you were really, if you were fully cynical like me, and not just, trying to get pat on the back for his sort of, pseudo and superficial stance that he's taking here, you could look at, do what a lot of people that critique the greenwashing and the greening movements do. I got into this by reading a good book on this, is Toxic Sludge is Good for You. And it talks about how companies, like when I buy that macaroni and cheese and they show like a tree on the cover and say, we give this much money, are they really doing it? How well is it working? Is it adequate? Is it just a good feeling? And so what you want to do is you want to dive into that, not just say, oh, this company has an initiative, so they're not, they're not going to make money and they're fake.
The dread imagination of the hypothetical bastard child of Karl Marx and Michel Foucault.
Ooh, that's like the scariest thing that he could do, is have a bastard child with two parents. That's if you know the definition of bastard, it's kind of funny. Also, Michel Foucault, some of the only philosophers that he's ever really even heard of.
And if you can't see this, or worse, won't, then you are either too ignorant to be doing what you are doing, or willfully blind.
Yeah, if you don't see it my way, you're wrong. This guy, he's definitely not a uniter. He's a big-time divider. That's like a huge part of this philosophy he's espousing, this ideology he's pushing. You're going to see a lot more divisive language coming up.
Precisely the manner that will usher in the darkest of days you can possibly imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. The world's seen a lot of bad things. I think having a couple Turkish people as managers, and, maybe some women doing science, and someone with an indeterminate gender, running an ice cream shop, are not really the darkest future I can imagine. Even if his hypothesis comes true, that companies won't make as much money because they're hiring diverse people instead of people who are going to make them more money. Is that really the darkest future you can imagine? It's more like, yeah, we gave some people jobs, we didn't make as much money, instead of buying a vacation house every month, I could only buy a vacation house every year, or something like that. But, he's definitely using all this imagery. I mean, don't forget, he's like a Jungian guy who's like using all these symbols to scare everybody. It's kind of contemptible how he leverages this psychology in such a dark way.
And what of ESG principles? Do I know of what I speak? Well, throughout 2010 and 2011, I worked with the sole Canadian contingent on the UN's 2012 Original Sustainability Plan document, Resilient People, Resilient Planet.
I love that. He's like, here's this big idea, and I know this because I worked on this one project like 10 years ago that you've never heard of.
A future worth choosing. And I learned something about how such sausages were made. Although the so-called high-level panel charged with this overwhelming and Tower of Babel-esque task...
Here he's misusing the Tower of Babel imagery. I think he's just kind of using it to mean like a cluster, like a big mess up with a lot of people. But if you recall, the original Tower of Babel was built to try to reach God, right? And then of course God said, no, you can't do that, and gave everybody different languages. But he and a lot of other people misuse it as like to be like a big confusing thing. Or even worse, in his case, I think he's using it backwards. Instead of saying like you shouldn't try and touch God because he'll change everybody's languages, he's envisioning the Tower of Babel as something where there were a whole bunch of different people with different languages, like some kind of diverse committee coming together, and that was a bad thing.
Was hypothetically made up of the typical stellar luminaries, ex-presidents and prime ministers.
Hypothetical stellar luminaries, but we're supposed to despise those pencil-necked geeks.
And their ilk. In reality, the task of actually writing the paper, and therefore thinking through the details where the devil hides, was typically shunted down the hierarchy of authority until it landed on the desk of someone who had the interest, time, and presumption to devote some real effort to the task. Someone like me. I say this without cynicism. Ex-presidents, etc., have calendars that are fully booked, often months or even years in advance, and simply do not have the time, resources, or often the ability to sit down and think through, write, and edit the vast research proposal, because that's what the UN report really was, that makes up a plan for the planet. And who does? Who's an expert in planetary sustainability? No one.
Yeah, actually climate change and geography and plate tectonics, temperatures, all these things. There are millions of people studying this. There are journals that you can read. There are so many experts you couldn't even name them. I think he's trying to sort of subconsciously pull this, let he who is without sin cast no stone, cast the first stone. I mean, the reality is, he's just trying to like say his reality. He's talking about himself and trying to project it into everybody. He's trying to leverage people's unfamiliarity with climate scientists, because there are no celebrity ones that I know of. I mean, I guess there's that Greta Thunberg woman, but actually a lot of people know a lot more. It just happens to be that Jordan Peterson can't bring himself to acknowledge any of their work that they do.